It's another big day on the economy and on the energy front. Let's bring in our political editor, Andrew Clennell, straight off the bat. And we've got this energy intervention in the market. It's extraordinary. And I guess the question is, when will it end? When will the scenario be in place for the market that the government sees it fit to withdraw it this winter?
Well, I suggested yesterday from my information it would be at least a week, Kieran, but the effect of yesterday's move by the Australian energy market operator was to renationalise the electricity market, albeit temporarily. It took me really to this Yes Minister clip.
What's the matter, Bernard?
Oh, nothing really, Sir Humphrey.
You look unhappy.
Well, I was just wondering if the Minister was right, actually.
Very unlikely. What about?
About ends and means. I mean, will I end up as a moral vacuum too?
Oh, I hope so, Bernard. If you work hard enough.
Makes me feel rather downcast. If it's our job to carry out government policies, shouldn't we believe in them?
Oh, what an extraordinary idea.
Why?
Bernard, I have served 11 governments in the past 30 years. If I'd lead in all their policies, I would have been passionately committed to keeping out of the common market and passionately committed to going into it. I would have been utterly convinced of the rightness of nationalising steel and of denationalising it and renationalising it. In capital punishment, I'd have been a fervent retentionist and an ardent abolitionist. I would have been a Keynesian and a Friedmanite, a grammar school preserver and destroyer, a nationalisation freak and a privatisation maniac, but above all, I would have been a stark-staring, raving schizophrenic.
Indeed, Sir Humphrey Appleby. Well, Morris Yema argued as New South Wales Labor Premier that he had to sell off the power generators to keep the lights on because only the private sector would invest in new baseload generators. Looks like a decade later, the opposite has happened. Some irony then I saw in this tweet by Chris Minns, the New South Wales opposition leader, Labor leader today, blaming privatisation. Make no mistake, this energy crisis is a failure of the Liberals' privatisation, he says. It's insane to think that we have to go to these private companies and beg them to keep the lights on, when we could have had these companies in government hands to provide baseload power and not had giant spikes in energy prices in New South Wales. I got news for Chris Minns. He was a staffer in that government. It was a former Labor government that started the privatisation in New South Wales in 2008 and 9, selling off the retailers and generation trading rights. This created more money to construct necessary transport infrastructure, as did the sale of generators and then the electricity poles and wires by successive coalition governments. But it means that the private sector has been in charge of our power supply. In New South Wales overnight, the latest episode in this current mess was we had the Bayswater Power Station breakdown. One of AGL's 11 units is shut because it is due for maintenance. 4 others of the 11 have simply broken down. These are old coal-fired power generators which have not been replaced by the private sector over the past decade, as the private companies look at the climate policies of successive governments, or the energy policies perhaps I should say, and say we are moving away from coal, time to invest in gas and renewables. So the Australian energy market operator, as we reported yesterday, has shut down the energy market, probably for at least a week. This means our tax dollars will have to be paid as compensation to the power companies. Energy Minister Chris Bowen was asked rather bluntly this morning if telling people to switch off the lights, otherwise known as demand management, is the government's only option to fix this present crisis.
The decade of denial and delay has had real consequences. I announced our Rewiring the Nation plan to fix transmission in my first budget reply. It wasn't something that we worked up in my office or Mark Butler's office. It was something that was worked up by the Australian energy market operator. Their integrated systems plan outlined where the investment needed to happen. And it's on their website. It's been on their website for years. That's why we're at where we're at now. But you can't fix a decade of inaction in 10 days.
No, David, demand management is not the only option. Indeed, it's not the best option. The best option is ensuring that energy generation occurs at the level needed, and that's what's been happening.
Anyway, it's interesting. What we've seen in the face of this energy crisis today is a doubling down by the new federal government when it comes to its climate change commitment, cutting emissions by 43% by 2030, with the PM making a formal pledge to the UN and declaring he will put this target in legislation when Parliament resumes next month. The Energy Minister says what's happening at the moment is a crisis, but he says this reinforces the renewable energy path the government is going down to secure energy supplies.
At the moment, we are facing, as you know, a very serious and challenging situation in the energy market, what some would describe, I think accurately, as a crisis setting. That makes this work more important, not less. Setting the framework for the future, getting the investment going that has been so lacking, getting the policy framework working together with the states and territories to get the job done.